welcome. And I am happy to be here today with Zach Dennis. Zach is uh, currently one of the students in our facilities class. And uh, in one of the discussions I had with him, I found out that their corporation has been doing some exciting things with green initiatives. And because of that, I said, hey, I think it'd be great to hear what your corporation is doing and some things, especially in regard to solar energy and a lot of other things to not only save money, but to generate some revenue for the school corporation. So Zach, if you would start off by telling us your position and where you're working, and then you can we'll talk about things that you guys have done and maybe some things you'd still like to do.
Yeah, so it's a unique position. The title is financial operations specialist, and there's a few school districts that are starting to invest in these positions. But really, this securing revenue for school corporations is not becoming as easy as it once was. And so the role of the school business official, just basically making a budget every year and making sure we're using the right account numbers for things is really becoming an antiquated role for school corporations, and they're having to get more creative with how they're managing their budget, how they're securing revenue, or trying to mitigate expenses as much as possible. So I do a lot of things in the business office. I think it's fair to say it's a bit of a CFO or assistant superintendent of business and operations internship would be a good description of what I do on a holistic level. But one of those things is to secure data. And much like we would want data to drive our decisions in a school building, that occurs on the district level as well, from the perspective of everything really, but especially with where our dollars go. My position is really one that creates capacity to dive into the data on where our dollars are going, and then gives us some direction on how to address those.
So as far as looking at green initiatives, a lot of times we have this thing in our head with facilities that green initiatives sound great, but they cost a lot of money to do. And in the real world, we don't get a whole lot of, dollar for dollar return on those kind of things. But you're seeing quite the opposite on some of the things that you guys have done in your school system.
Yeah, so I think that every school corporation needs to know their strengths and their weaknesses. And when it comes to Wayne Township, our operations fund is our weakness. This year in our 2022 budget, we will levy for $24 million. And because of property tax caps or circuit breaker, we will collect less than 7. Okay, oh, wow. So yes, so we are collecting 25% of our operations fund revenue. And operations fund is where you pay. It does, and so that's where you're paying, your light bills from. That's where traditionally you pay your entire transportation department, which for us is going to run just shy of $12 million next year. So we aren't capable of doing that, and so we are lucky enough to have 2 operating referendums that have passed, and that helps us. But one of our strengths as a district is our debt service fund. We have a ton of capacity in the debt service fund, and so where we're looking is to transfer dollars that would normally land in the operations fund and try to alleviate that stress with items that we can pay for in debt service. And so in debt service, you can pay for capital expenditures. And this is where I'm getting at your question, which is, people think of these green initiatives as expensive. And that may be the case, but with every building that we renovate now, we make sure that we're placing LED lights, for example. And so I think a lot of the people that will listen to this will be old enough to remember the old incandescent light bulbs that we had at home, which are the least energy efficient light source that we can have. And so then it transitioned into the halogen lights. And I think we'll all remember when the little spiral light bulbs came out at Lowe's and they said, hey, use these, they're much more energy efficient. Well, LEDs are even more energy efficient than that. And so with every school that we renovate, part of the interiors package is going to be to swap out the old halogen, tube lights that,
Right.
every room had with LED lights. Occupancy sensors are a hot button topic.
Let's go back to the lights first.
Yeah.
Because when you make those kind of renovations, is it a big expense up front to do that?
I wouldn't say it's any more than any other lighting fixture that you would install. It's not. It's just deciding to do it. We did it for the first time 9 years ago, and they've got about a decade lifespan. So with our interiors renovations next year, we will be for the first time updating an LED light, and that's how long you get.
What is the variation in the number of lumens? Do you see a difference?
I think most people, when they walk into a room that's LED lit, will feel more bombarded with lights, a whiter light.
Yeah, that's my opinion also.
So, some teachers, and this is kind of counterintuitive, but some teachers are kind of sensory, what's the word I'm looking for? They're sensitive to it, and they'll bring in like an old incandescent lamp from home. It's a bit of a counterintuitive deal there with what we're trying to accomplish.
Right. Okay,
so,
then you were going on to something else. Sorry.
Yeah, so occupancy sensors, which most of us would recognize these as what we call motion sensors. So basically, they'll detect a lack of occupancy in a room and shut the lights off. School buildings are so energy demanding because you've got people there almost 24/7, whether you've got events there at night, lights are on, air handlers are moving air. The pool air handler is constantly moving air because of humidity. There's just a constant drain. And so, anytime we can shut off the lights, I mean, yeah, one room is one thing, but think of an entire hallway. Ben Davis High School, which is our one of our two high schools in the district, is among the largest educational spaces under one roof in Indiana. More than 1 million square feet is what we're talking about there. So we can truly shut off lights to an entire hallway. And I would say, before we get into the solar discussion, the last major initiative we're doing is what we call variable frequency drives, or VFDs. And these are pieces of hardware that are installed on air handlers, the items that actually push the air through the ducts and eventually into the rooms. And so whenever an air handler starts, the biggest energy expense is right at the beginning. It's an electric motor, and you get all or nothing right now. If you've ever replaced, if your air conditioner's gone out at home, you've got what's called a start capacitor, which is just a big store of energy that dumps the instant that the air conditioner turns on, because the fan goes from 0 to 100 immediately. And that's the biggest source of energy expenditure for these air handlers. It also causes malfunction. When you go from nothing to everything immediately, you've got mechanical breakdown that's likely to happen at that moment. So at any rate, these variable frequency drives allow the motor to start up a little bit, and then a little bit more, and slowly get up to operating speed. And the net result is, by the time you get to operating speed, you've used less electricity to get there than you would have if it goes from 0 to 100 immediately.
Isn't it true also that when you're billed for electricity, you're billed on more of the surges?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and maybe you can give me a chance to share my screen now. I think I can just go ahead and do that.
Yeah, you're co-host there.
So what I will do is I actually pulled an electric bill, our most recent electric bill.
Okay.
And so you should be seeing
I see that.
our electric bill now, and I've pulled Ben Davis High School. And if you want to go, let your eyes immediately go to the right, we might as well talk about the end game here, which is what we pay for the month of September of this year at Ben Davis High School. So just shy of $61,000 was our electric bill for the high school.
Wow.
And so that's a lot of times in the business office here, when we talk about saving dollars, we talk about in units of teacher salaries. And that's basically salary and benefits of a first-year teacher in a month, is how we would look at that. So if we want to look deeper, and I'll zoom us in here into the details of the bill, And what you'll find is we're billed on really two things make up our bill, and that's how much energy we use, which is the energy line there. So $25,593.12 is how much electricity we used at Ben Davis High School for the month of September. But the lion's share, or at least the majority of the bill, is what's called a demand factor. And so basically, if no light was ever turned on at Ben Davis High School for the month of September, our energy would be zero. But our bill would still be $37,260.92 because electrical companies are going to bill you on the idea that, well, yeah, if you did turn on a switch, though, you would expect there to be electricity, which is true.
Wow.
So everybody thinks that your electrical bill is how much electricity, and this is true for your home as well, but everybody thinks that your electrical bill is, how much electricity you use. Well, no, more than half of your bill is for the utility company to say, well, yeah, it's there if you need it, but even if you don't, we're still going to bill you.
That's very interesting.
And so that number is calculated then on what your peak, it's called your peak load. So they calculate your demand charge based off of the most you ever use at any given moment. So if you want to save money, your goal should be to reduce the most electricity you could ever use at any given moment. Hence solar.
Okay, got it.
So I'll stop sharing this because I think I chose to share a window, but if you'd like, we can go ahead and dive into kind of the solar farm that we call here at Davis High School. And so I will go to Google Maps to show you our Ben Davis High School campus. And so if we look in the middle here, we see kind of our athletic complex. We see our varsity football field up here, and I'm doing this to give you a size comparison. If you let your eyes go to the left here, this used to be a golf driving range, and the corporation owned it. And we thought it would be a good, steward of the community, kind of a reduced cost. Our golf team could go use it. And quite honestly, I think it turned out golf is not a hot commodity on the west side of Indianapolis. And so we largely had a massive space, like what on earth are we going to do with this? And a local company who happens to be a solar engineer said, well, hey, why don't you put a solar farm there? Solar farms do have to be near the site they're going to feed. So we own some land down by the airport as well, but we don't have any schools there.
Okay.
So you can't remote meter. We can't generate electricity on that site. It has to actually feed a building.
Okay. So
Ben Davis High School at the time happened to be the best possible scenario, and so we placed this. These are all solar panels right here, just south of this ball field here. And again, if you kind of let your eyes go back to the varsity football field, you can tell how large that solar array is. And it is the largest solar array on an educational property in the state of Indiana.
Wow.
Now, this does not totally make us independent of meter energy, of grid energy. What it does is it shaves off our peak load and hence lowers the electrical demand of Ben Davis High School.
Okay, so now this is a facilities class, so I'm going to ask you some technical questions and I'm going to ask you to explain. And how exactly do we create electrical energy out of a solar panel?
So, and you're lucky here because you're getting an old chemistry teacher as well. Electricity is generated from the sun through what's known as a photovoltaic cell.
Okay.
And so each one of those solar panels contains hundreds of these photovoltaic cells, and they take solar energy, heat energy basically, and through a process that I will admit that I don't understand, it converts solar energy into an electrical current. And then all of that current goes to an inverter because it's created as direct current electricity. But we need alternating current in order to, we don't use direct current on anything really, other than I guess cars. But we needed to go to alternating current, and there's an inverter on every single panel. And then you can imagine there's a hard line that runs along this road right here and eventually makes it to a meter that that feeds Ben Davis High School. In fact, there's a large television screen right when you walk in door one that shows how much solar energy is being harvested at that given moment. So you can walk by that at any given part of the day.
So how many photovoltaic cell, did I say that right?
You did, yeah.
Cells are present in that solar field?
So there are over 10,000 there. And what's neat about this is everyone's afraid of the cost of solar. So when we did this, which was in 2018, the price per panel was a little bit over $700. That
Okay.
price has now come down to just a little bit above $450 per panel. So it's one of the weird things going on right now, which is actually becoming more efficient yet cheaper.
Interesting. And then how much electricity does it actually generate for you on an annual basis?
So I think the best way to share that data would actually be to look at a graph that I've created from the usage at Ben Davis High School. I assume you can still see this?
Yes.
So what I do is I take our electric bill every month at Ben Davis High School, and I look not at the demand charge, I look at the energy that we use. And so if you look at the colors of the lines here, I think what you'll notice is the result of our solar field. So in March of by the time it was built, okay, March of 2019 is when we went online. So if you look at I guess that's orange and blue, that's a good baseline of 2 years of what we do at Ben Davis High School electricity wise. But starting with the gray and then obviously with the green and the yellow, you can see what the result of that solar field is.
That's amazing.
Yep. So what we're able to do is, kind of in the peak electrical months, which is the cooling months, we were, somewhere between 35 and 40,000 kilowatt hours per day at Ben Davis High School. And where we are now, guess what? Somewhere between 20,000 and 25,000 on average. So, you're talking about 15,000 kilowatt hours daily.
So does this make enough energy, electrical energy, that you can also generate for other buildings, or is it just for Ben Davis High School?
So Ben Davis High School is so large that this particular solar array only takes a chunk out of what we use there. So this is not enough. But I will say that we're exploring doing solar at other locations. And what I'll share with you here is a recent proposal. And I know it's difficult for you to see right now. I'm going to see if we can't maybe present this. Did that get bigger for you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
So the company did come back to us about 2 months ago, and they said, listen, I think there's some other places that we can actually put solar arrays that will produce a surplus of electricity. So now we're talking about actually selling this back to the grid. Ben Davis High School uses everything it produces.
Right.
We can actually put some solar arrays, and whether they're roof mounted, so these things can be roof mounted now. So you don't even need land.
Wow.
So you can actually cover your roof with these solar panels. It doesn't cause any leak problems. They're obviously, in fact, they're not fastened at all. It's just they're heavy enough that they don't move. So they're not putting any punctures into your roof membrane. But we're talking about actually creating so much electricity at some of these sites that we can, sell it back to the grid. And I will say there's some legislation that has made it through. Right now, you can sell kilowatts back to the grid at a dime per kilowatt. And, as is the case with many things, different industries have some strong lobbies at the State House. And the energy industry is one of them. And obviously, fossil fuel generated electrical lobbies are strong. And obviously not a fan of alternate energy sources because you're not buying it from them, you're harvesting it for free from the sun. And so they have gotten the Indiana General Assembly to reduce that price from a dime, 10 cents per kilowatt hour, it will go down to 3 cents. So if you don't have a solar field commissioned by June 30th of 2022, you're going to—
There's a date coming up because I just heard that. So right now is the optimal time to go ahead and get those in. Does that put
So,
pressure on your school district to decide, okay, if we're going to do this, now is the time?
so we are finishing the RFP, the request for
Okay.
proposal, to do this project at the end of this week with proposals due before winter break. And part of that RFP is, hey, what can you get done by June 30th? What can you get commissioned?
Sure.
Because if we can get it commissioned before the 30th, that we're grandfathered on that price. Now we know it's not going to be everything, okay? So we're going to forfeit some of this,
Right.
but you know, a big part of who we choose to do the RFP is who says they can get the most running by
Exactly.
June 30th.
That's
So,
outstanding. So you would stand to, even with the expense and now that the price has gone down on the panels, um, is this we always hear things like, I'm old enough to remember that when we started getting computers in school and computer salespeople would tell people in the office, well, pretty soon these things will, they'll do your work for you. Well, that never happened. But are these the kinds of projects that will eventually pay for themselves?
so I appreciate that's a bit of a softball there. And so at the very bottom row, you'll see the 25-year savings. Okay, so this is what our consultant prepared for us. And so as a result of, and this includes rate increases as well. So what we can't lose sight of right now is, yeah, we're reducing our energy demands, and we're actually seeing real dollar savings in the face of rate increases. And
Sure.
so what you see here is a 25-year estimated savings of just over $58 million. And to give the class some perspective, we are anticipating that this project will cost us right now roughly $31 million. And so
So
what
the
we're,
benefit then of,
well, over 25 years, we're talking about a benefit of $27 million. So we're talking about $1 million a year. And remember, we collect $6 million of an operations levy. So we're putting $1 million back into our funds as a result. And remember what I said, our strength is our debt service. So $31 million may sound like a lot, but we're able to bond that out without raising taxes. So there's no net effect on the taxpayer as a result of this, but there's a net effect on us, and that is $1 million more to spend on something else every year.
okay, so Zach, as an individual, you have the ability to take or to make risky investments. And as an individual, I can do that. I can play the stock market. I can, invest in a certain kind of property. I can invest in a business that could go belly up in 10 years. Is there risk associated with this kind of a project?
So the way solar RFPs go out is actually a bit of an industry term called a guaranteed energy savings proposal.
Okay.
And so your winner of this RFP essentially has to guarantee you these energy savings. But I will say that's how far along the solar industry is. You know exactly what you're going to, yeah, you may have a few more cloudy days in one year than another. But again, the statistics that go into, this industry is very far advanced. They know how many sunny days there are in central Indiana every year and how many there's not. I'll go back to my graph here. You can tell in November and December, there's not much of a benefit to a solar field because, we're not getting as intense solar radiation. And not to mention, those are the doldrums of winter, right? It's gray outside. It's not, the sun's not shining. So that's a problem. Now, I will say that if I go back to the map here, you see these small kind of white building right here.
Right.
That's 2 propane generators. So what our vendor did for us, they said, hey, listen, we're not going to reduce your demand all the time because of those November and December months. So we're going to put 2 rather large generators there. And so propane is cheaper than buying electricity from Indianapolis Power and Light. So whatever our solar field isn't creating, our propane generator does. They talk to one another.
So
And
it's a
so
backup.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
It's like your cloudy day backup. That's great.
That's exactly right.
Interesting.
Yes.
So comparison wise, and I know we've kind of talked a little bit about the idea of the wind farms. Which generates more electricity?
So now again, you always have to be aware of who you're talking to. But
Exactly.
in talking to our solar consultant, they don't have a lot of good things to say about wind electrical generation. The main gripe that our consultant has is the durability. It seems like if you're heading up to Chicago on 65 and there's that giant wind farm there.
Yes.
There's always a handful of them that are not turning, and
Yeah.
he said that's
I've always
because
wondered why.
they're malfunctioning.
Really?
And so he said they're just not a reliable. They're not a reliable source. Obviously, they take up a massive amount of space. They also, from my time as a chemistry teacher, we would do some alternative energy projects. There is some studies being done on the effects of human beings and animals on the frequencies that those emit of sound. And so those solar panels are guaranteed for 25 years.
Outstanding.
So that's the warranty on those.
We start looking back, and if there is an upside, and this is a terrible thing to think through, but if there is an upside to having gone through a pandemic and the resulting federal funds that have come to schools, it's that a lot of our schools that were built 30 years ago were at their maximum age for HVAC equipment. And I know personally of a number of school districts that were pretty much holding their HVAC systems together with baling wire and bubble gum, hoping that they wouldn't fall apart. And these ESSER funds have allowed them to go in, I mean, obviously there's a backup in some places to get the equipment in and to get the contractors who can do that. But because of the needs of increased ventilation and that kind of thing, a lot of school districts are doing the new HVAC and increased airflow and that kind of thing. So I think that's one of the, if there is such a thing as a good thing that has come out of this, though we'll pay for it one way or the other. I mean, we know that.
It would shock me if anyone listening to this year or in future years, if the school district, since this is a federal deal, so whether they're in Indiana or not, it would shock me if anybody would ask their facilities person or their operations person. It would shock me if they said they're not doing something with HVAC with the ESSER dollars, because in terms of building improvements, that was the mandate of the ESSER funds that, okay,
Exactly.
you can use this for infrastructure, but it has to be with air quality, air circulation.
Right.
So whether it's a boiler, a chiller, or air handler, I would be shocked if there's any district that's not doing at least one of those. And you're spot on. The lead time, we're doing 2 elementary schools right now, and the lead time on air handlers is well over 35 weeks when it's normally,
Wow.
2 or 3. So it's pushing things back for sure. And the same thing with this has nothing to do with this conversation, but site work as well. Asphalt contractors are hard to pin down right now.
Yeah, and I've actually been in a school corporation recently that needed HVAC work done, and because they couldn't get it completed and couldn't get the contractor in, they had to pull one in on a tractor trailer, and it's sitting out behind the school building, and it's running the HVAC from the tractor trailer.
Yep.
I know the expense on that. That's terrible. But
the nightmare is if you ever get into a situation, you plan these things. If you're doing a chiller, you do it over the winter, and if you're doing a boiler, you do it over the summer. And the scary thing is you better make sure you got your replacement on site, because if you disconnect the pipes and then you learn you've got a supply chain issue, now you're doing what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the worst thing possible is when it falls apart completely and you don't have the equipment there and
Right.
you can't get it. So other things that you guys have done for energy savings, have you had to do things like, energy audits where you've said to teachers, you can't have your own refrigerators in your classrooms? You have to have, you can't have lights, you can't have microwaves, that kind of thing.
We have, and it's funny how I think you get a little bit of a look into the building leadership there, because you've got some principals that are fully on board with the district mission on those energy audits, and then you've got some buildings, I swear, they bring those mini fridges back the Monday after the energy audit happens, and it's just it's the way it is. But I do think I'd be remiss. The solar is a big investment, and I won't pretend like it's not. And again, we are in a fortunate situation with our debt service fund that we can do this. But one thing I do think most school districts, whoever's listening to this, could do is an alternative fuel source on their school buses. And so,
yes, please talk about that, because that's a big one.
Yeah, so what we have done is we have moved to propane buses. Now, they also have compressed natural gas buses, CNG. We have determined that propane is what's right for us. And so there's a look at the summary of our propane and diesel spend. It's not obviously what I'm looking for. There we go. So starting in 2017, we said we're going to buy propane buses instead of diesel buses. Now, propane buses are better for the environment because propane is a much more refined fuel and it's a much cleaner burning fuel. Not to mention, a propane engine, much like a gasoline engine, holds about 10 quarts of oil, whereas a diesel engine is more in line with 35 quarts of oil. So the oil changes are much more expensive on a diesel bus.
Sure.
And then speaking of the environment, every diesel engine since, gosh, I think 2013 or 2014 has to have what's called a DEF tank, a diesel exhaust fuel fluid tank, which is basically a nitrogen compound is injected into the exhaust stream to catalyze unburnt particulate matters and NOx emissions.
It's really strange that you remember all these things.
It is, but that's an expense. You fill that up just like a gas tank on there.
Right.
The propane buses don't have to do that. But I think it's great. The environmental benefits are great. But the financial benefits are also there as well. Right now, our contract, we get our diesel and our propane from the same vendor, and we have a 6-month contract for both, and we renegotiate based on market values. Okay, so we're not.
It's a huge guessing game, isn't it?
It is, and you don't want to be exposed to market fluctuation. You want to have your price locked in. So right now, our diesel costs us $1.64 a gallon, and our propane costs us $1.03 a gallon. And so what we're doing is we are buying propane buses and retiring diesel buses.
Okay.
And so again, you can purchase school buses with your debt service fund. Now, some school corporations will either lease them, and those lease payments by statute have got to come out of the operations fund.
Right.
Or some schools are in a situation with their operations fund and they don't have much circuit breaker, and they will literally pay cash with a portion of their operations levy every year. Again, we cannot do that. A bus costs now, every year we spend about, if it's a special education bus, we're close to $190,000 per bus. We do like to air condition our buses, I will say. You can definitely strip buses down and make it a not comfortable ride for the students, but we do prefer to have air conditioning on our buses. We have 78 seat buses. Special education bus, again, you're going to be pushing 190. General ed buses are now in the area of $150,000 per bus.
And that's for a 72 passenger?
78.
Oh my goodness. I
78.
can't believe I was director of transportation. Among my other responsibilities as an assistant superintendent for a district. And we were buying school buses for $72,000 for a 72 passenger bus. And so, and that's not been that long ago. So,
Yeah.
well, that was 2008.
Wow.
2007. So that's astronomical.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Um,
so we run right around 130 bus routes a day. And so you always want to have about 15% in reserve because buses break down. You got to have a bus to replace a bus that breaks down.
so what's your bus fleet? How many buses?
154.
All right, and then and how many do you replace each year?
14.
And what's your how many years? Are
12.
you're on a 12-year bus replacement?
Yeah.
Okay.
The state, I mean, INDOT, is Indiana Department of Transportation, is very stringent, as you would hope,
Oh yeah.
for vehicles that transport students.
Yeah.
If you've got rust on it, you have to inspect your buses every year. You
Oh
know
my
that.
Lord, yeah.
And if
Yeah.
there's rust, if there's anything, you have to fit. That's a big expense. We paid last year. We paid more than $50,000 in rust repair for buses.
Oh yeah. And you know, your bus mechanics and your bus barn people are worth their weight in gold. Because if they are doing a great job in preparing for those bus inspections, um, it is worth everything. And I've been a part of those bus inspections and the preparation that leads up to them. And I know what it takes, and it's a year-long effort. And I I have deep respect for the people that run the bus barns
Yep.
because, and I've been there, I've watched them, I've supervised them, and it's an amazing thing to be involved in that. And I you know, when I think about the job that you do, the work that you do, and the operations side, and when we're talking facilities, you know, the interesting thing to me is that it takes all kinds of administrators to make a school district run. And a lot of people don't know that, you know, especially teachers and a lot of principals don't know. But when you start getting into central office administration and you realize the multiple moving pieces that it takes to make, especially a large district, and you're a large district, to make all of these things run flawlessly, you know, it looks like when you dig in and you get inside that wheel, there are a lot of hamsters running on those wheels. And it takes a very concentrated effort. It's not just one person at the top. There are a whole lot of people that you depend on every day. And I can't say enough, you know, when I went through the process of receiving the bids for buses and reviewing those bids and understanding what went into that process, it made me very grateful for the people who were involved in that whole process. And you just can't, as a principal, you don't even know that it exists. You start to learn that process. You know, I think that's so important.
Yeah, you know, and not that I'm in a position to give advice to anybody, but I was plucked straight out of a high school classroom and taken straight to central office. I was never a building level administrator. And when I was getting my building level license, I thought that my career would be using words like pedagogy and using words like evaluations and the RISE, you know, model and things.
Sure.
But school, sometimes I would say multiple times a week, I walk to my car at the end of the day with no realization that I work for a school district. I don't see kids. Sure. And it was a tough transition for me, you know, because kids are why you get into education. Exactly. But when you start looking at, you know, some of the things I've showed you on the screen today, that benefit is for the kids, because if we don't have to spend money on electricity, we can spend it elsewhere. Right. We can drive it to the classroom. And so if I could give a bit of advice to anybody that could be watching this, you know, I think you're doing this superintendent preparation probably because you might think, you know, you're going to be an assistant superintendent of elementary instruction or secondary instruction or curriculum. No one thinks about the finance guy or the finance girl. Or the operations person. And that's, I will tell you right now, the demand for those positions, and I'm saying that, you know, in the position that I'm in right now, it's so important to have a person that is willing to think at this level, because again, funding schools in Indiana, at least, is not as easy as it used to be. And you really have to be willing to look for these efficiencies. And if you just have a lot of school corporations just want to pluck a principal that's in their last 5 years of their career and make them the business person, teach them how to do the budget for the DLGF, and just make sure the ship doesn't sink. I think there's a lot of school corporations that are going to suffer because of that method.
And Zach, I will have to tell you, I think really, in my experience, that delineates the two kinds of school business officials that we see. You're one of the kind that I'm very encouraged to see, who are looking at this from the perspective of, I want to know everything I can. I want to understand the efficiencies where they exist. I want to build this side of the operations into something where we're using it as a science, and we're understanding the science of this in such a way that operations and finances actually work together, as opposed to somebody at the end of their career who's saying, yeah, I know a little bit about, keeping books. And that's the old school way. And fortunately, we're moving away from that. Now, the unfortunate side of that is that a lot of our school districts in Indiana, we have about 294 school districts in the state. A lot of them are small, and they don't have a dedicated chief financial officer. In fact, the reason that I still contend for this course, this facilities course, along with the budgeting course that Dr. Cadell teaches, is that a lot of our superintendents are not only going to be the lead instructional person for the district and emphasize things like they have to evaluate principals and they have to lead in pedagogy and climate and all that kind of thing, but they also have to create a budget. Dr. Cadell, as a superintendent for about 18 years, created a budget every year for that. That's why he knows it backwards and forwards. I was an assistant superintendent, and so I did not only the supervision of principals, but I was involved in the operations side. And, so that means that I was in charge of food service. I was in charge of the bus and transportation side and the maintenance side. I learned all of those things, whether I wanted to or not. And for me, that's why I fight for this course, because this is essential. Even if you're a one-man shop or one-lady shop in a school district, and you have a chief financial secretary who really does all of the bookkeeping for you, you have to know, what does this mean? When you look at the difference between diesel and propane, you may not be able to understand that. And you might have to call somebody like Zach Dennis and say, Zach, I understand you guys have made the transition from diesel to propane. How did you do that?
Yep.
Who did you talk to? Who are your consultants? And a lot of places, the region, like the, Region 8 or the Central Indiana Regional Service Center, those places will work with school districts, especially the smaller districts, to help them find these efficiencies where they don't have somebody designated like you to do that job.
Yeah, and what you'll find too is with anything in school operations that involves dollars out the door, transportation, child nutrition, operations, obviously, technology even, vendors
Tech is so huge. Yeah.
They will take advantage of you.
Yes.
Just in the same way that your cable company will gladly jack the rate up every year, and they just wait for you to call and threaten to cancel before they drop you back down. Your vendors, if you're not watching,
that's exactly right.
And so that's the thing. You're exactly right with these small corporations. Superintendent can only do so much, and a lot of times the budget is an afterthought. And in fact, there are budget consultants that literally you pay them to literally do the budget for you.
Oh yeah.
Because it's time that, as you say, a one-person shop, what are you going to do? Make sure your students are learning, or make sure that you've got money?
Right.
I mean, that's right.
And so when you look at the difference between a large, and I've had students ask me, how do I decide whether I want to work in a large district or a small district? I have always enjoyed working in larger districts. And part of that is because of the support that's available in a larger district. And, I worked for the largest district in the state, Fort Wayne Community, which right now has about 26,000 students or 28,000 students. And I enjoyed that because there were support people for literally every kind of position. And so if you needed to know something, you could go to somebody and they had that responsibility. But if you're working in a district where you have 1,800 people, which is still a relatively decent sized district in the state of Indiana, you might find that your transportation director is also a principal.
Mhm.
And so they're running both of those jobs from their school office. And so I think those are the realities that you have to face.
Yep, it's you're right. And again, my position is, I mean, the best way to describe it is capacity. When they added this position, it was purely, the CFO is operating at the 30,000 foot level to make these
Right.
hundreds of $1,000 decisions. And I get into some of that, but as you can see, the stuff that I'm working on is maybe a little bit smaller than that, but I can't remember what movie it was, but I think it was a baseball movie, but they said, a lot of little buckets make a big bucket. And
That's
so,
exactly.
that's
Especially the way that we've created these silos now. And this is something that Denny Costerison talks a lot about. And I really appreciate the work that Denny has done with IASBO. And I asked him specifically about this when he came to our study council a couple of years ago. And when they had made the change to, the new format that took effect in 2019. And I said, Denny, what do you feel about this? And he said, I knew it was going to happen. So once I realized it was going to happen, I wanted to be involved because that way I had input.
Yep.
And I respect that because then it was able to work more effectively for the school corporations in the state of Indiana. And I think there are times when we have to look at things and say, this is a battle we can fight. And there are other times we say, this is the time that we join together and we make it work because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think what we've said in the business offices a lot is we'll make anything work, just don't surprise us.
Right. Yeah, I don't like surprises either.
No.
Well, Zach, I want to thank you very much for sharing this. And I know that there will always be new things that we can learn in the saving of money and green initiatives, and especially as we build new buildings. And I think that's an important thing. And I'm working with one of our other students who is, and I know you've talked to Victor Guthrie, who is an assistant superintendent over in Abu Dhabi, and they're building a brand new building, $100 million building for the American school there. And one of the things that they're working on as they're building this new facility is to try to make it as germ-proof as possible, which is another fascinating concept, because I think that will be a big outgrowth for new facilities being built after the pandemic.
Right.
As an assistant superintendent, I used to attend these meetings, the county health department meetings, where they would talk about, we have to be prepared for this pandemic. And we would sit through these meetings and say, okay, this sounds good, but we know we're not really ever going to hit a pandemic, shut the country down. Well, this one shut the whole world down.
Right.
And so we've learned a lot from that. But again, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And I'm sure this will be very useful to the class.
Good. I appreciate it.